The end of summer has brought with it a new political narrative. There's increasing pressure on the Liberal government to help Canadians while trying to turn around their own political fortunes. From that Liberal challenge to Pierre Poilievre's new momentum, a test of his ability to connect with Canadians while keeping the base happy. Let's break down what's at issue. Hello there, I'm Rosemary. Barton. At Issue is back with Chantal Hebert, Andrew Coyne, and Althia Raj, who's in Quebec City for the Conservative Convention. Good to see everyone. I guess what we are trying to figure out today is how the summer has changed the political landscape, because I think it has, and how concerned the Liberals should be about what we're seeing. Chantal, let's start with you. Do you think that after the cabinet shuffle, which was the last time we all spoke, anything changed for the Liberals in terms of how they were dealing with these issues that are on the minds of Canadians?
I don't think that it was the cabinet shuffle that changed anything, except to raise a lot of question marks about what exactly Liberal strategists thought they were accomplishing with that shuffle. But I think what we saw over the summer is a replay of what we saw over the inquiry over on Chinese interference in the electoral process. In clear, the government always playing catch up. And on the Chinese file, and that's not to diminish it, that may not have been an issue that mattered to a lot of voters.
Right.
But over the summer, what they have been doing, and they are still doing, is trying to play catch up on an issue called housing, which actually connects with voters. Yeah. And you can see the damage in the polls.
Well, one of the things that some Liberals say to me, Andrew, is that they saw that cabinet shuffle and then they weren't given anything to say, anything new to say at the doors over the summer. So they weren't sure why that happened, and they weren't sure how their fortunes will improve if they don't have things to say.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a remarkable shift that we've seen. I mean, going into the summer, the Liberals were, on average, about 5 points behind the Conservatives. They're now in some polls 12, 13, 14 points behind, so something has certainly happened. I think what happens oftentimes with governments is a bunch of issues coalesce in the public mind into one big issue. And what triggered this, I think, was the increasing salience of the housing issue as the interest rates continue to rise and really started to bite people, even as housing prices themselves haven't really fallen very much. And the absence of any coherent plan from the federal government to deal with it. And in fact, that infamous statement by the Prime Minister that it wasn't even really federal responsibility, I think that kind of clicked with people of, well, did they have a plan about anything? I mean, the most striking numbers from that Abacus poll that came out was they asked people, does the government have a good plan, a bad plan, or no plan on a series of issues? And on virtually every one, very few people said they had a good plan. Some more said they had a bad plan. But the biggest single number of people said they had no plan. When that becomes the perception of it, or the reality that you're kind of adrift and rudderless and don't really, or kind of asleep at the wheel, that's not good news for a government if that perception kicks in.
So, Althia, why do you think this is happening? Why are they kind of struggling a bit?
Well, there's a couple of reasons why. And Andrew is right to point out that, basically the plunge over the summer. Pierre Poilievre has really successfully changed his messaging from freedom, which we were talking about a year ago, to talking about people's pocketbooks. Something he started as soon as he got the leadership, but really has pounded. And now, when you'd ask people to talk about issues, they talk about inflation in the same way that Pierre Poilievre talks about inflation. His messaging has worked. He has had ads in heavy rotation in key marketplaces across this country that have helped soften his image. And in the meantime, the Liberals have offered nothing. They have not countered Pierre Poilievre's messaging on policy. They have not countered Pierre Poilievre's messaging on his own brand.
Right.
So it's not, I don't know that it's really about the policy. I think there is no message. The Liberals don't have a message. And when you ask Liberal MPs, that is the number one thing they complain about.
Yeah. We're going to talk about Poilievre in the next block, so try not to use all your lines about Poilievre here. But Chantal, why do you think the government has not been able to turn things around? And I guess my other question would be, as someone watching them, why are they not more concerned? Even if elections may be 2 years away, but why do they not seem to be acting concerned?
Well, why have they not succeeded in turning things around? because they did nothing to turn things around. You could basically argue that this has been an empty Liberal summer. They were absent from the battlefield and continue to be until today with this announcement that got the inquiry into foreign interference out of the way. But I've covered a lot of governments that were coming close to the end of their reign. It's true that that tends to happen in a third term.
Yep.
But I have never seen one that does not try to fight back for its survival until the summer.
What do you think, Andrew? Is that what's missing here?
I think the big problem they've got is that people are tuning out the Prime Minister. I mean, the numbers on the Prime Minister, on Justin Trudeau, are extraordinary and negative. People, I don't think, are listening to him anymore, so I'm not sure that he's going to be able to really mount that kind of fight back. I mean, yeah, the election's probably a year or two away, but you have to go back a fair bit to find a governing party that was behind its leading opponent by 14 points in the polls. You know, that kind of thing is, it's not impossible to turn around, but it'd be unusual.
Chantal and then Althia, yep.
The last time we saw a government with that far of a loss was Brian Mulroney. Yeah. Not to bring back bad memories for the Liberals, but that's a fact of life. I'm not saying that will be the case, but I do agree that people are tuning out the Prime Minister, perhaps because he's not saying much of anything.
Yeah.
So what are Liberals going to do then, do you think, Althia, if they're trying to, I think, try and show empathy with Canadians and get them to pay attention to their message too?
Yeah, well, I mean, Chantal hit the nail on the head. What's going to happen next week is that the Liberal caucus is going to meet in London, Ontario, and the Prime Minister is going to likely hear an earful. I spent the last 2 weeks talking to backbench MPs, basically, lots and lots of them, and they all complain about the Prime Minister's office, about the Prime Minister himself feeling like he's checked out, that the government is rudderless, that there is no plan, that there's no focus, that they have too many priorities, that they have like nothing to put on the window, but mostly that they haven't been able to communicate their message, that they're doing, you know, they're spending a lot of money. They have invested a lot, whether it's dental care or childcare or even housing, but they're not good at explaining their own policies. And that is something caucus wants to change. Whether that will result in changes, I don't know, but you know, next on the agenda is basically the PM getting prepared to hear an earful of complaints from MPs who've spent the entire summer knocking on doors and have heard that people are really angry.
Either we're talking to the same MPs or all the backbench MPs are saying the same thing.
We should say one other thing, which is that, and I know we'll be talking about Poilievre, but his numbers have definitely improved as well. Now, whether that's because they've been softening his image or what have you, or whether it's because people have decided they want to get rid of the government and they've decided, therefore, to look at him in a more prime ministerial vein, I don't know. A wise old pollster said to me once, when people have decided to get rid of a government, it doesn't matter who the other guys are.
Yeah. Chantal, last word.
That's true, but the environment within which governments operate these days have nothing to do with what we've seen in the past, and 2 years is a hell of a long time. So we don't really know what the environment will be for the next campaign. Yeah. Also, I know you want to talk about Pierre Poilievre, so let's do this. It's not great to be so far ahead this early. It's great for a convention, but it's going to be hard to sustain.
Okay, so keep those thoughts because we're going to take a little break. Then you can talk about them all you want. We're going to take that break coming up. We'll be back with more at issue. And we've been talking about Conservatives in Quebec City for their National Policy Convention. With the wind in their sails, how does Pierre Poilievre convince more Canadians that he's the man to be the next Prime Minister? That's next on The National. Welcome back to another round of At Issue. Conservatives across the country gathering in Quebec City for the party's policy convention.
Conservatives will get back to the common sense of the common people. We will make the country work for the people who've done the work.
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre seems to be connecting with Canadians. Polls show the party has momentum. And in his speech tomorrow night, Poilievre needs to keep supporters happy and new voters interested. Okay, let's bring back everybody. Chantal, Andrew, and Althia. Althia, you're in Quebec, so I'm going to start with you. Any Conservative I've talked to over the past couple of weeks, is much happier than they've been in quite some time. What are you getting the sense? What kind of sense are you getting on the ground there?
Yeah, I would say almost that they're jubilant. Caucus members entered Quebec City, like the meeting this morning, with big, wide smiles, but the delegates are also really enthusiastic. I mean, I think they would have been enthusiastic because this is the first time in 5 years that they're meeting in person. But of course, this bump in the polls has them really excited. Under Pierre Poilievre's leadership, I mean, he won with such a huge margin of support that really the party belongs to him. And everybody here is, you know, they may not think that he's the greatest thing, but they think he's the man for the job, and they think that the party, you know, that he can lead them basically to government. So there's real unity, and it's not forced unity. You know, we often go to conventions where they try to make a show of unity. This unity is genuine.
Chantal.
Yeah, well, the last time I covered people who were jubilant about a leader who had yet to fight an election was Paul Martin. And an election is a serious test. Forget the polls, because if the polls were to be believed, Paul Martin was going to sweep the country, except he didn't. So it is great for Pierre Poilievre that his first convention as leader, which is important, is happening in this context. It is really dangerous for the Conservatives to be fitting the drapes to whatever the prime ministerial residence will be in a couple of years before they actually fight that election.
Yeah, because to be clear, they're high in the polls right now, but there's not a lot of policy, obviously, out there from Pierre Poilievre, and I don't know that there needs to be this early before an election. But I guess the question, Andrew, would be how does he maintain any of this momentum when the scrutiny will inevitably be deeper?
Yeah, I mean, he's got to stay on message, as they say, and particularly in terms of affordability and pocketbook issues, the kind of, you know, meat and potato stuff that is, I think, really mostly responsible for where they're at in the polls right now.
Right.
There's been lots of the usual media coverage before this, you know, speculating that there'll be this or that resolution that will cause him all sorts of grief. I actually don't think he's going to have a lot of trouble. He owns this party. And one of the things that I think caused people concern in past conventions was, did this signal who was actually in charge? Was nice Aaron O'Toole in charge, or was there some darker force out there that was going to take over as soon as he got into power? You can say what you like about Pierre Poilievre and his message and his style, but what you see is what you get. I don't think it'll be very hard to say that there's some unknown out there that's going to take over from him. He is the face and voice of this party because he represents it.
Chantal, you went in there?
Yes, what happened to Aaron O'Toole at this convention, a virtual one, is what hurt him most, i.e. delegates deciding they were voting against a resolution that says climate change is serious. You're not going to see anything like that at this convention. And yes, there are resolutions that could turn out to be cumbersome, but Mr. Poilievre bought himself some insurance by saying outright that he wasn't bound by any of those resolutions.
So
and
Althia,
the party is not going to object because they're in love with him.
Okay, let's go to Althia, because you're there, and I know you'll be watching the resolutions. I know you're kind of a nerd about resolutions, in fact. So do you think that that's going to be a challenge for him on the floor?
Actually, I don't, and maybe I see things a little bit differently than Andrew and Chantal. And for some viewers, obviously, they may not agree with some of the policy proposals that the Conservative Party has put forward, and Mr. Poilievre might try to distance himself depending on the audience he's talking to. But I do not believe that there's any policy in this book that the leadership is completely embarrassed by. And in fact, some of the resolutions that in the media we've spoken about as being more controversial, for example, you know, what gender your child identifies with at school, whether or not teachers would have to tell parents about that. There is a lot of enthusiasm for these types of measures in this room. In fact, I would say it's even a motivating factor that has brought people to Quebec City. And they believe that most Canadians agree with them. And so while may not be popular with some Canadians, some very vocal Canadians, there is, you know, it's not seen that way in this room at all, and I believe it's not seen that way by Mr. Poilievre's team either.
Chantal?
Okay, but there are other resolutions that have caught attention, for instance, in Quebec. One of those says, why, while you're doing away with the CBC, do away with Radio-Canada. And I'll just remind people that a lot of pundits laughed at the notion that culture cuts could cost Stephen Harper his majority in 2008, and that is exactly what happened.
Yes.
So those small resolutions, and no one saw the resolution about not stating that climate change is a serious issue coming, including most of us, until they voted it down.
So what is that risk
I don't
here?
think on the CBC resolution it will pass. Like I would be very surprised if it will pass because the leadership will speak against it.
Yeah, Andrew, what is the risk here then for Poilievre after a pretty successful summer? What are the risks for him?
I think the biggest risk is that he doesn't appear authentic, and so far he's doing a pretty good job of seeming authentic, whether you like what that is or not. According to the wisdom of people like me, he shouldn't be at where he's at in the polls right now, right? He should be too off-putting to centrist voters in suburban Ontario. Well, he's doing plenty fine with suburban voters in Ontario. So I think the biggest risk for him is, to repeat my point, is if people see there's a conflict between what he says and what he's actually going to do, or between his leadership and where the party is actually going. And right now, you would say there's very little daylight between them. The party is going where he wants to go. He's going where the party wants it to go.
Yeah, Chantal, then Althia.
I don't think that the test of that balance is going to be at this convention, frankly. But I do believe that his speech is going to be important, more important than any of the debates over whatever resolution is on the floor.
Well, it sounds like they've been working on the speech for an awfully long time. Because to your point, Chantal, the first time for him to sort of speak to the country in this job. So, Althia, what do you think are the risks for Mr. Poilievre?
Well, the second time, I would say, because he did speak to the country when he won the leadership.
Yes.
The biggest challenge, frankly, is that he's going to be opposition leader likely for 2 years. And right now he can talk about common sense and bringing it back home, and people project what they think that he's talking about, what that means.
That's right.
But 2 years is a long time to sustain being an empty canvas where people have projected their hopes and aspirations onto you. He will have to say more, and that will become more controversial.
Welcome back. The government and opposition parties have finally agreed on someone to lead that public inquiry into foreign interference. A Quebec judge, Marie-Josée Hogue, has taken the job.
Justice Hogue will be tasked with examining and assessing interference by China, Russia, and other foreign states and non-state actors, including any potential impacts, to confirm the integrity of and impacts on the 2019 and 2021 general elections.
Okay, let's bring everybody back. Andrew, I'll start with you on this. I had almost given up hope that this would even happen because it seemed to be a real challenge to find someone who would accept the job. What does this mean going forward, do you think?
Well, I guess my main question is, why wasn't this process adopted from the start? You know, I might prefer that the judge had national security experience. I might prefer the terms of reference were tailored more narrowly, but that's not what's important. What's important is we've got all the parties signing off on this, on an issue that from the beginning engaged the interests of all the parties. So the notion that you could either not have a public inquiry into something like this, or that you could tailor it with some false process with somebody who had been chosen over the objections of the opposition was so nonsensical. So this is a return to sanity, and I do think that having the two stages is a good thing, where the first stage you look into the more specific questions about who knew what when, and in the second stage you look into the broader questions about foreign interference generally.
A lot of different people taking credit for how the fact that we got to this place. The NDP says it was their win because of the pressure they put on the government. The Conservatives say the same thing. Are there political benefits to this happening, Althia?
Well, there's political benefits for the opposition parties. I don't know that there's political benefits at all for the Liberals, which is why, to Andrew's point, they didn't want to do this in the first place. Yeah. Because even if they believe that they have nothing to hide and that they acted appropriately, it is a process that you cannot control. So no government wants to do that. I'm not convinced that it is going to become a nonpartisan process as it plays out. I believe that if the opposition smells blood, they will still take advantage of anything that the justice writes about or any failings that they feel haven't been properly covered. I do hope that people want to try to instill trust in government institutions and in independent institutions, because I think that's one thing that's been heavily shattered since COVID. But I guess I'm not too optimistic on that front.
What do you think, Chantal, especially the timeline of when that first report has to come down, which is towards the end of February? Obviously, that timing might be in relation to an election, and all parties would be concerned about that. But what do you make of where we're at with this?
I'm with Andrew on this. Why did this not happen before, and how, governments routinely in the past created commissions of inquiry on issues. This is not the Gomery Commission on political financing and the Liberal Party, but I suspect there is a bit of that hanging over the Liberals that caused them to just sit on this and fight this lost battle for months. I, as opposed to Althea, do not think it's going to necessarily become a terribly big partisan hot potato. I could be wrong, but the main reason why I think that is I don't think it's a bread and butter issue that touches voters the same way as the issues that will seize Parliament going forward.
Yeah, you didn't see Pierre Poilievre on the barbecue circuit talking about foreign interference. That's fair. Andrew, does this potentially reopen the topic, or do you think that it's sort of baked in at this point?
It depends what we find. I mean, there's a lot of unanswered questions, as I say, about who knew what when. If the answers that come out, if we get answers, are benign, then it won't cause much ruckus. But if, there are much darker possibilities.
Last word to you, Althea, on that.
I think the who knew not what when is important to address, because as we saw over the summer, like when Elizabeth May had a look at the confidential annex, she didn't actually get to see the confidential documents. And she said that, David Johnson suggested that opposition leaders would be able to say whether or not his findings were true, and she can't. And so there needs to be some clarity around that, I think, in the minds of Canadians who do follow this issue. And yes, it's not an issue Pierre Poilievre talked about during the barbecue circuit. In fact, it's not an issue he even decided he wanted to talk about today. He sent out his MPs to talk about it.
Right.
So it has, the focus has shifted.
Okay, going to leave it there for this week. Thank you all so much. Appreciate it.